I'm feeling pretty good right now. I've been having a pretty good day, and you know what that means? That means it's time to talk about Vanilla World of Warcraft. Or Classic World of Warcraft. You take your pick, call whatever you want. What I want to talk about today is servers. And not just for World of Warcraft, but gaming as a whole. It's 2019, and gaming has come a long way since the 90s, and along with it, server structure has changed, and servers play a pretty big role, actually, in how games play out and how they play out socially. It's pretty obvious to most of us why this is, but even so, I want to cover it because it's fun to talk about, and maybe some people will listen to this that, aren't that familiar with servers. Maybe some of the younger generation's going to listen to this. That's right, I just used the word younger generation. Okay, let's get into it. So why is it that servers play such a large role in video games and social interaction? Why are we getting into more of a serverless environment? And how has that affected things? So I'm going to be using Vanilla WoW as an example in a little bit. But first, I just want to talk about some larger theory type stuff and society as a whole, man. So our population has exploded. We are pushing up towards 8 billion. We've long surpassed the 7 billion, and it's just going and going and going. And for me, I think that's an extremely interesting and partly problematic thing for humanity as a whole, because we can do tribes, we can manage tribes and clans and small villages. We're fine with that. Give us a few dozen people, a few hundred, and we can put them together and organize them and be successful, and we can be productive and all of that. But you start pushing that number up higher and higher, and we stop really knowing how to manage that many people. So when you're in a small village, it's pretty easy to know everyone in the village. You see everyone's face, you smile, you wave, you say hi, you know everyone by name, you know their personalities, you know their history, and it works. But when you get to, like, say, a city, I've lived in cities with millions of people in them, everyone's anonymous. You walk by people in the street and you don't really say hi, you don't really smile, you don't really wave at them. There's just too many people to stay on top of that. You're not going to know everyone's name or their personality. And that changes the social aspect a lot. Because even though when you're in a city, you're actually around way more people, you can be a lot more isolated. Because people don't say hi, they don't wave, they don't smile to one another. I mean, I grew up in the countryside, and even every time I go back, I see people drive by who wave at me, and I have no idea who they are. That's not going to happen in a city. And part of the reason it doesn't happen in the city is because it would be exhausting to go by and to smile at every last person and to wave at them and to say hi to them. And so people don't. And because people don't do that, and they do it less and less, the odd time that someone does smile at you or wave or say hi, sometimes it's a bit awkward or a little bit weird. And if you think about it, that's kind of backwards. You would think that in a place with millions of people, the social factor would be super high. But in fact, it's the exact opposite. Cities breed a state of social exhaustion and an apathy towards seeing new people. And again, because of this, people actually become a bit more isolated and a bit more alone than they otherwise would be. And because you would know more people in a small village than you would your own city, a smaller group is actually better for forming meaningful relationships. Now, some people are the exception to this. Some people can thrive in a city and it's not really a problem. But for a lot of us, I know certainly myself, it's not always the case. If you asked a younger me who grew up in the countryside with nobody around what I would think about living in a city with millions of people, I would have told you that that had to be a social utopia, where you would never be alone, you would never be lonely, and you would always have tons of friends. Now, if you ask adult me, that's not the case. That's definitely not the case of living in a city. So moving on from our super subtle kind of euphemism or example there, let's move on to servers. So many modern games have a very serverless structure now. They have automated matchmaking, and that changes the dynamic. It used to be that you'd browse the server list, find a server that you like, or maybe return to a server you've already been to, and when you're in that server, you play with the same group of people over and over again. Now, in a serverless system, what typically happens is you click a button, you hit play, you get matched with a group of people, and you're in the game, and there you go. You're hit the ground running. There's no downtime, there's no waiting, and you can always play the game mode you want, and you can always play instantly. Every time you make progress in the game, it's carried over in the next game and the next game. It's super convenient. There's no empty servers, and what that also means is because there's no empty servers, there's less money that the developers have to spend, which is good for the developers. And if it's good for the developers, it's good for the game. So in a lot of ways, serverless structures provide a very fantastic and clean and fluid and elegant gameplay experience. But again, for me, this is a lot different from where I started out with video games. I grew up playing in the 1990s, and I actually didn't even have internet until 2000. So when I started playing on my dial-up connection, which is just a phone line, the games I played on all had servers. Now, a lot of the servers were empty, and it took a lot of time to populate a server. So if you had a favorite server you went to and you were the only person in there, you might have to wait an hour, maybe even 2 hours just to fill up that server. Or you might have to start talking to other people and get them into the server to join you. This actually wasn't necessarily that bad because it was some downtime that you got to talk to those people during, and you had to, have some fun in the game. You would just run around and do stupid stuff. You wouldn't actually play the game to try and win the match. So actually sitting around in an empty server with one or two other people sometimes bred a lot of fun that you otherwise wouldn't find. But that aside, it took lots of time to populate a server and get a game going, and that part did suck. Sometimes it was harder to find a good variety of game modes because you had to go from server to server, and maybe everyone was split up across different servers. And with server structures, you'd always join games mid-match or at the end of a match. That isn't so much the case with a lot of modern games these days. Because of a lot of this, you also had a slower pace and lots of downtime, lots of waiting. So we've come a long way from there with tech and the internet, to the point where we've been able to pretty much just get rid of the concept of a server list and just hit a button and start playing. Have a full match, have a full group of people, and just get going. Now, obviously I have mixed feelings about this, and I'll get to them. But right now, I want to explain my experience with World of Warcraft and how that game evolved. Because when it came out in 2004, and when I started playing in the very beginning of 2005, you had to choose a server. And when you were on that server, you were stuck on it. You had to play with the people that were on that server, and that was it. Now, fortunately, I picked a well-populated server, so there were lots of people. And anyone who played on a server like that can tell you how great it was. For a lot of us, it's pretty obvious, and some people will say I shouldn't even be making this video because it's too obvious. Why am I talking about something so obvious? But again, there are people who didn't experience this. But for those of us who did, we formed a lot of very meaningful relationships and friendships with people. And we did it in a way that's really difficult to find in gaming these days. Now, maybe it's partly because this was 14 years ago and I had a lot more free time then than I do now, but I don't know if that's entirely true. Now, my particular server had at least a few thousand people on it, and that was persistent from day to day. Every day I'd come in, I'd see the same faces, the same characters, the same names, and I'd start recognizing them. I'd see who was where and who was doing what. I'd know who to go to get my enchants. I'd know who to go to that was a good leatherworker or a blacksmith. I'd know who was a good tank, who was a good healer, who was a good DPS, and who the bad ones were. But I'd actually start recognizing these people. And as I played with these people and interacted with them, I'd start to recognize their personalities and kind of who they were. And again, this is on a daily basis. So day in, day out, you keep seeing the same people over and over again. Which is obviously a lot different than a serverless environment where it's always a fresh batch of people, and you never really have the time to build up that relationship or really get to know one another. And a huge aspect of this too is that both for them and for you, you had a reputation. It was a good reputation, a bad reputation, maybe just a neutral one, but people would treat you based on the way you acted on the server and based on your reputation. Similarly, they had a reputation and you would treat them based on how they acted. You would know who's friendly, who's helpful, or who's unfriendly and who's maybe a little bit overly competitive. So you'd start to fall in with your group of people. And for people who weren't very friendly and were too competitive, they'd find that maybe they didn't get along so well. It was actually a major detriment to be toxic. And this was in lieu of any kind of user reporting system or, saying who was a good teammate at the end of the match and anything like that. You didn't even need that structure because the game itself had that social structure. And I think that highlights a point that a lot of games which are trying to sort of deal with these problems of toxicity right now, they're actually trying to deal with a symptom rather than the cause. The cause of a lot of the toxicity is that games just don't have that social structure anymore. And so trying to deal with toxicity without changing the social structure is going to be very challenging, if not impossible. Now, that aside, on these servers, you would start to form friendships and you would start to form rivalries. And the best thing is that these things happen naturally, organically, and over time. You weren't reliant on matchmaking and server algorithms and stuff like that to try and guess who's going to go best with who. You could just relax, play the game, and gradually and very naturally you could invest in your reputation. It was actually pretty great. You weren't reliant on whether or not the matchmaking algorithm was up to snuff or not, because there was no matchmaking algorithm. The entire algorithm was a socially constructed one. And further, when you did want to make friends in the game, you didn't have to go above and beyond or put forth a whole bunch of effort to do it. It just happened. You could relax and play the game, gradually and naturally invest your time, and your reputation would grow. You would start to form these relationships, and you would start to get to know people. And before you knew it, you had friends. You had a tight-knit community. For a lot of people, such as myself, this was an amazing thing. I was at a point in my life where I didn't have the opportunity to actually have friends or a community. And so this game offered me something which was truly amazing. And something which got me through some really tough times and genuinely changed my life. And I think that's the reason video games can be so powerful, and I think that's the reason that games such as the original World of Warcraft can be so powerful, because they actually legitimately did transform people's lives. And it wasn't just because of gameplay mechanics, it was because of the people on the game. Now, one other major thing that a server would put into place is that because you have a reputation, you're not going to be a bad player. You have a really good incentive to play nice. Because if you build up a really good reputation, your server knows that. Everyone on the server gets to know that. The people who know your guild or your name know that. And similarly, if you tank your reputation, that's it. You're pretty much done for that character, at least for a very long time, until people forget you, because you're on that server. You're stuck there. And so even if you do something kind of stupid or something bad to someone, and you do burn some bridges, you're going to have to move along and try and find someone else to play with. And if you do that, and you play better, and you play nice, and you play well with those people, you can build back your reputation. It's not a permanent thing either. It's not a permanent record. And so it was a very good and natural and organic system to deal with toxic players. Furthermore, the game as a whole required teamwork. It required teamwork to a very large degree. And so again, if you were very toxic, you couldn't get into teams, and you couldn't play a lot of the game. And I think it's really cool that this game had such an amazing, basically, system for toxicity. And the fact that it didn't even try to do this, it just did this organically and naturally. I think it's something that a lot of games can look to and aspire to. And I think it's something that a lot of game designers should pay a lot of very acute attention to. That it's not a question of software. You're not using software to solve this problem. You're not creating the world's best user reporting system. You're simply creating the right environment that is reliant on a social factor to deal with the toxicity for you. And I'm going to leave the video there for now and save the rest of it for a second part. It would just take me far too long to edit this video and put the little animations and stuff together and get it out in a timely manner, so stay tuned for part 2. In the meantime, the sponsor for this video is myself. It's a passion project I've been working on. So basically, I've had the problem my entire life where I find it really difficult to find people who like the same kind of games that I do. And I know that if I could find those people, I'd be able to make a lot of new friends quite easily. But it also seemed kind of silly to me that there's no service online that really lets you do that effectively yet. So I put one together. And my ideal scenario for it is that I can find some people in my city who also play Classic World of Warcraft, organize with them to get on the same server in the same faction, play together, and then once we're done playing in-game, we can actually go meet up in real life and hang out. If that sounds interesting to you, then please head over to nubble.com, create a profile, and be sure to add Classic World of Warcraft to it to show your support. Thank you guys so very, very much for listening, and let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with some of the things I said. It's always good to read different people's opinions and thoughts, and take them into consideration for any future videos I put out. In the meantime, I will see you guys around in part 2.
you.